Swans are renowned for their breathtaking beauty and elegance, yet they are typically not the most sociable of birds. Therefore, when this man found himself in close proximity, ready to rescue an injured swan, he had no anticipation of the astonishing response he would encounter from the swan. Richard Smith lived in the countryside of England because he loved being close to nature. He often saw swans, foxes, squirrels, and other animals in the nearby fields which he really liked, but he didn't expect to get very close to them. Richard was a writer who needed inspiration, so he spent a lot of time alone, which he preferred. Being by himself allowed him to think and be creative. But he also knew that it was important to go to the local village once a day to stay sane, whether it was for groceries or just to get some fresh air. It didn't take him long to get to the village. He only had to walk for 15 minutes on a beautiful cobbled street to get there. The area was steeped in history, evident from its aging buildings and the picturesque green fields and forests surrounding it. The weather was often gloomy, as is typical in the UK, so Richard always carried a rain jacket during his walks, just in case. Little did he know how useful that jacket would become one day. On a particular day, Richard found himself in an unexpected situation he couldn't have foreseen when he woke up that morning. It followed a frustrating bout of writer's block. Richard's publisher was pressuring him to complete his next novel, but he was struggling to make progress. An entire month had passed, and he had barely managed to finish a single chapter. It is safe to say that this had started to negatively affect his mental health. This was something he struggled with, and he knew that he had to get out and do something in order to escape his own mind's maze. So, putting on his hat and grabbing his rain jacket, he made his way outside to go to his favorite spot. There was a cafe in the village that sold a delicious cup of coffee, and the best part was that it was located just by a park that overlooked a pond. This would be the perfect place for him to decompress. There had been a horrific gust of wind the night before, and the effect showed as Richard made his way to the village. He could see how fences that weren't reinforced had fallen over, trees had lost excess foliage, and some people had even lost bits of their laundry. The aftermath was palpable. Glad that he was out with calmer weather, he tried to take in the fresh air and warm sunlight that peeked at him from behind the gray clouds. Vitamin D was a must for his condition, and he started to feel a bit better the further he walked. Slowly, his mind began to open back up to the storyline he had in his novel. It was about a traveling veterinarian who came across interesting cases where he could help various animals on his travels. While Richard was not entirely a fan of animals, he did enjoy admiring them from afar. As he walked into the village, it became extremely apparent that the wind from the night before had been far more destructive than he had initially realized. The little cafe that he loved had its front window completely shattered. He approached the owners with concern, and they explained that a chair from a neighboring terrace restaurant had taken flight and gone straight through their window. Luckily, no one was hurt. Richard expressed his sincere apologies, only for the owners to brush him off. They weren't too concerned, as apparently some members of the village had been affected in much more severe ways. A local farmer was distraught because his fence had collapsed, resulting in the loss of a lot of livestock. Determined to find the roaming animals, people from the community had immediately volunteered to assist where they could. However, Richard offered his help to the villagers instead, knowing that he wouldn't be very helpful if he found himself face to face with a cow or goat. So the village got to work, trying to clean up and fix what could be fixed of the devastation. Without even realizing it, Richard was getting a form of self-therapy, one that was sincerely needed. What was initially meant to be a short trip into the village ended up being a whole day's adventure, one that ended up inspiring him in some ways. When all the hard work was done, the group of volunteers sat with a beer in hand and had a good laugh together. While Richard was not usually a social bug, it seemed that it was exactly what he was missing. The solidarity of people working together towards a common goal felt good to him. For the first time in a month, he felt somewhat serene at heart. That is until it was time to go home. As with anyone who may be having a tough time, walking away from a happy experience can sometimes be quite daunting. That, in addition to the idea of walking into a big runaway cow, quickly put Richard back into a sour mood. He tried desperately to hold on to the remnants of his happy day, but soon felt all his doubts slowly creeping back into his mind. He felt like he needed one more sign, one more note of happiness that he could, in fact, draw from to keep his spirits high. Little did he know what was waiting for him right around the corner. As Richard turned the corner of the rise he had to climb to get home, he saw something white draped over his neighbor's fence. Initially, he just thought it to be a lost piece of laundry that had floated off someone's line and landed there. How wrong he was. As he got closer to the fence, he noticed that the white shape was, in fact, moving quite awkwardly on the fence. Richard stopped walking and concentrated harder, convinced that he was seeing things. But sure enough, the shape jerked against the fence in an abrupt manner. He realized then that whatever it wasn't merely a shirt. Walking slowly up to the shape, he gasped in horror. There before him, caught on the spokes of the fence, was a majestic, fully grown swan. Richard could hardly believe his own eyes. He looked helplessly around for assistance, but no one was in sight. He quickly realized that the poor swan must have been swept up by the winds the night before and got caught on the fence, where it had stayed, desperate for help. The more it struggled against the wiring, the more the poor thing tangled itself. Richard was stricken with fear. What was he supposed to do? He knew he needed to help the swan, but he was petrified. Swans are, after all, known for their aggressive personalities and strong beaks. He didn't want to be bitten but couldn't turn a blind eye to its suffering. Eventually, he managed to find the courage to help the innocent creature. He had convinced himself that with the help of his raincoat, he could help the bird while protecting himself. He slowly approached the exhausted swan and draped his rain jacket over it to lighten the pressure his body was putting on the fence. He carefully untangled the swan's foot and managed to unhook the part of the wing that was stuck. Taking a deep breath, he then wrapped his arms around the big bird and picked it up off of the fence. What happened next, Richard could never have anticipated. Once he had managed to lift the bird off the fence, Richard simply stood silently, holding the bird in his arms, unsure of what to do next. Fortunately, he didn't have to make a decision because all of a sudden, the swan lifted its tired head and wrapped it around Richard's neck in a tight hug. Richard was surprised but stayed calm, feeling the swan's strong heartbeat against his chest. The swan was hugging him to show its gratitude, and Richard was overwhelmed with emotion, almost shedding a tear. Then, a deep sense of peace washed over him. It was a sign that everything would be fine. Slowly, Richard walked to the nearest farmhouse, doing his best to keep the swan comfortable. He knew the farmer could help the swan in ways he couldn't. After 3 weeks of loving care, the swan was completely healthy and ready to return to its natural habitat. It still visited Richard sometimes, offering cuddles and inspiration when he needed it most. What you think of this story? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you.